been getting progressively harder to eat, which has been extremely frustrating. Please pray for me. From Justin Bieber.
You can see this eye is not blinking. I can't smile on this side of my face. This nostril will not move. So there's full paralysis in this side of my face.
I just saw this on his Instagram and it is so sad. He actually has paralysis of one side of his face. He said he thinks it was maybe some virus that affected him through his ears, and now he's paralyzed. He cannot even eat properly. He had to cancel most of his shows. And I don't know if you guys recall, in March, his wife, Hailey Bieber, actually had a stroke. And this is a very sad time for the Bieber family. I just want everyone to put him in their prayers. And I just pray Justin gets better soon. He just has like the drooping eyes and cannot even move any part. I remember when his wife was ill, she came out and tried to educate us about what happened with her. Hers was a blood clot and she had to go through heart surgery. Hailey is 25 years old. Like, stroke happens to young people nowadays. We all have to be really careful and make sure our health is priority, because stress is a killer. Like, they've been going through a lot. In fact, she even said she was taking birth control pills, and that gave her really bad anxieties and migraines. Then she went to Paris and slept all through the flight. So the blood clot actually traveled to her brains. So we all have to make sure our health is priority and take good care of ourselves. We need to rest. Don't struggle and actually forget to rest, because once the health breaks down, everything breaks down. So I just thought to just send my prayers to the Bieber family. I know it's hard. Hailey actually wrote on her stories, "I love you, baby," with a crying emoji. So we have to be very sensitive also. Like, for me, this is not just content. This is more like education. It's more like a wake-up call. You're young, you're bubbling. You still have to be alert. Like, those things we think happens to older people, it happens to younger people now. And it's happening to us regularly because a lot of, like, COVID happened. Everyone is stressed out. There is a lot of anxiety in the atmosphere. We have to stop sometimes, just pay attention to our bodies. And when your body is starting to give you some signs, go see a doctor, go do some checkup, go do some tests. So I'm going to go ahead and just play the clip from where Hailey Bieber came and spoke about everything she went through, her treatment, and just listen and watch till the end, okay? Thank you.
But by the time I got to the emergency room, I was pretty much back to normal, could talk, wasn't having any issues with my face or my arm. They did like the stroke checklist in the emergency room and I scored a 0. I wasn't having any symptoms anymore. So basically, they did some scans and they were able to see that I had suffered a small blood clot to my brain, which they labeled and categorized as something called a TIA. I'm going to try to put the definitions of everything I talk about under here so that I don't butcher it. Basically, it's like having a mini stroke. It definitely feels like having a stroke, except my body was able to resolve it pretty quickly, and then I didn't have any more issues for the whole rest of the day and the whole rest of the time that I was in the hospital. I felt really thankful and grateful for that it wasn't worse. I wasn't going to have any permanent issues, but you know, my scans did show that I had a lack of oxygen to a certain part of my brain for a certain amount of time. Still definitely really, really scary. So when I was in the emergency room, they kept me overnight. They did tons of tests. They did blood tests to see if I had a clotting disorder or if I had an autoimmune disease, or they did everything. And anything that they could think of, they did. They also did a certain test called a bubble echo, which is when they do an echo on your heart and they take saline and they kind of I don't want to say shake it up, but they make it so it has bubbles in it, and then they put the bubbles in your vein to see if you have any bubbles escaping out of any part of your heart. And what they're looking for in that test is something called a PFO. Basically, what a PFO is something that you are born with, and typically at birth it's supposed to close on its own, except sometimes it does not. And it's a flap that's kind of like this between the right and the left chambers of the heart. So when I was in the emergency room, they did this test, they didn't see anything. They told me that I didn't have a PFO. So the next day I was discharged and I went down to UCLA to see some more doctors, to do some more thorough in-depth testing, because at that point they didn't really have an answer or a conclusion for why this had happened. They did come to the conclusion of why they think I had a blood clot in the first place. And the conclusion that all of the doctors came to was 3 different things. One was that I had just recently started birth control pills, which I should have never been on because I am somebody who suffered from migraines anyway, and I just did not talk to my doctor about this. So ladies, if you suffer from bad migraines and you plan on being on birth control pills, make sure you tell your doctor, because having a stroke is a potential side effect from birth control pills. The second thing was I had recently had COVID, and that was something that they thought was a contributing factor. And then the third thing was that I had recently gone on a really long flight. I had flown to Paris and back in a very short amount of time. And I slept through the whole flight both ways, didn't get up and move around, never thought about wearing compression socks. So basically, all of the doctors came to the conclusion that it was a perfect storm that led to me having a small blood clot, and that was the conclusion. So they still didn't know necessarily how the blood clot traveled to my brain. So when I went down to UCLA, we did some more in-depth testing. And when I went there, they did something called a transcranial Doppler, which is basically a much more accurate test to find a PFO. And what they do is, similarly, they do the saline with the bubbles, they inject it. But with this test, they listen for the sound of bubbles escaping in the heart. If they don't hear anything, presumably you don't have a PFO. If they hear a little bit, you might have one, but it's small. And if they hear tons of bubbles escaping, you have one, it's probably large. So I did this test, and they actually found that I had a grade 5 PFO, which is the highest grade that you can have. So mine was fairly large. But at this point too, I was just grateful that they found it and that they knew that it was there. And also the conclusion was that I had a blood clot that traveled into my heart. And instead of what typically happens if you have a small blood clot is that the heart will filter the blood clot to your lungs, and your lungs will absorb it because the lungs are so big and they can handle it. What happened with me is my blood clot actually escaped through the flap or the hole in my heart, and it traveled to my brain, and that is why I suffered a TIA. So the recommendation from my doctors at UCLA was to have a procedure done called a PFO closure, which is when they go through your groin, through the femoral vein in your groin, and they travel up to the heart, and they put this small little button, it looks like a little button, that buttons close the flap in the heart, and then eventually your heart tissue grows back over the closure device, and that's it. And then you have it forever and you continue on with normal life. So I recently got the PFO closure done, and it went very smoothly. I'm recovering really well, really fast. I feel great. The biggest thing I feel, honestly, is I just feel really relieved that we were able to figure everything out, that we were able to get it closed, that I will be able to just move on from this really scary situation and just live my life. And it was definitely a really eye-opening thing for me. I definitely felt a lot of anxiety through the situation, because from when the TIA happened to when I had the procedure to close the PFO, I just was really nervous a lot of the time about having another TIA or experiencing those symptoms again. And then I would get really bad anxiety, and my anxiety was kind of making me feel funny. It would make my fingers and hands feel kind of tingly. And I just honestly had a really, really hard time in the in-between. So ever since the TIA, I have been on a blood thinner and aspirin every single day. And I was also having an issue with the blood thinner medication because it was exacerbating my anxiety. It was making me feel very out of it, just really sleepy. But I was able to figure out the dose with my doctor, and now I feel much better. Now that it's all done, I feel so much relief, and I feel just so grateful to all of the doctors at Eisenhower Medical Center who took care of me, all of the doctors at UCLA who took care of me, Dr. Tobis, who performed my procedure and has taken really good care of me. Yeah, it's kind of hard for me to tell this story. I've only really up until now told friends and family and people that I know and that I'm close to, but I felt like it was important for me to share this, and because it already was kind of a public situation and people kind of knew, but they didn't really know the full story, and I also wanted to wait to explain everything until my procedure was done and finished, and everything had gone smoothly and was okay. That's my story. That's what happened. If there's anybody that watches this that has gone through the same thing or something similar, I definitely really empathize with you, and I understand how life-altering and scary it is. And if there's anybody out there who sees this and has maybe experienced similar things but doesn't really know the reason or know why, I would definitely encourage you to talk to a doctor. And yeah, so this is what happened, and thanks for watching.